Today we're gonna finish up this piece of crap.
Do you want to be cooler? Do you want to be more desirable?
You know what, guys? I got new merch. It's available now, crowdmade.com/JayzTwoCents. We got zip-up hoodies, we got tri-blend, we got a new logo. I digress. Since 2012, it's a digress logo. You guys have been asking for that. Anyway, we got all kinds of stuff. Zip-up hoodies, beanies, polos. Don't take my word for it, because obviously I can't do this ad. So just look in the description below and you guys will find the link. Thanks. So this will probably end up being one of those montage-y type videos. So there's a couple things I want to, I guess, answer from the comment section of the previous part of this video. I showed you guys how I'm using the crossflow rad up top because it's also working as both a reservoir and a fill and a drain section. And we'll show you how I'm gonna do that right now because I still have all the distilled water in here for my proof of concept that the loop would work. The pump did not, as I showed you guys, it just did not have enough power. But fortunately, my good buddies over at Performance PC stepped in and sent me the SwiftTech Apogee 2, or Apogee Drive 2, which is basically what SwiftTech did here was they took a Lane DDC pump, they shoved it on top of one of their copper blocks and put a heat sink on top. It should clear the components. I'm still worried about these guys right here on the side that stick out. So we're gonna do best we can. Hope it works. Geez, I hope it works, but I digress, that's besides the point. It should work. If my calculations are correct, which they never really are, so that doesn't mean shit, this should fit in there. But unfortunately, to mount this, I've got to take the whole thing apart because I've got to drain it and I've got to remember to peel that off. I also have to take the motherboard out anyway, or at least mostly, because I have to install my M.2, because remember, this was just a temporary mock-up. So just like any other reservoir, to get the loop drained, you've got to have air in versus air out. So if you've got coolant coming out, you have to have air coming in, which means we need an inlet and an outlet. And this crossflow rad works perfectly for that. So what I'm gonna do right now, I'm sure this looks kind of obvious now how we're gonna do this. I am just going to have two tubes hooked up to this. And you can't just blow into the tube and expect the coolant to come out. I've had a lot of people suggest like, well, you should just hook up a vacuum and pull the coolant through. The problem is all that's gonna happen is it'll pull straight through the rad and back out the other side. It won't force it through the loop. For that to work, this has to be the only outlet and that has to be the only inlet. But because this is in the same reservoir, radiator, technically a reservoir in this case, that won't work. So what I can do though now is tilt this up, and that's how we can drain it. So I'll have to do this a bit because it's gonna get trapped in all the blocks and stuff. But I'll be able to get pretty much most of it out this way. So what we learned is that the height of the 90 degrees on here made it interfere with the side panel there. Fortunately, the Apogee Drive 2 allows you to sort of rotate these fittings about 45 degrees. That way I can get a little bit of extra clearance. Just further shows that even parts that are made for small form factor builds like this can still sometimes be too big because of the overall size of the case that we're dealing with. All right, so another snag in this build, as it seems to be the theme. Unfortunately, the EVGA power supply that we had, the 650 GM, is dead on arrival. And I'm a little disappointed about that because of the fact that it's so small, it was gonna give me all kinds of extra room. Fortunately, I have a 650 watt Silverstone here. The EVGA is rated better. I think we just got bad luck. But I want to keep going and I don't want to wait for a replacement. So I'm going to be stealing the one out of the 1800X build because I'm going to be taking these 1800X parts out of here and probably building something in like the H200 or something like that from NZXT. A lot of you guys are probably wondering like, well, Jay, why didn't you just use this build then for your CES? Because it's got an 1800X and stuff in there. Well, that's because I promised I was going to do a fully custom water-cooled yada yada blah blah blah, and I want to keep my word. Also too, one of the reasons why I'm not using this is I really wanted the silver build, but when they sent me this for review, they didn't have silver yet, they only had the black. And the problem with the black is scratches show up, fingerprints, skin, because it's like a bead blasted, sort of a sand blasted finish. Your skin cells and stuff get all gross and nasty on it. Silver hides all that, so there is that. But now is a better time than ever to just start to take this one apart, put it out to pasture, and get that one up and running. All right, this is about to be a straight up moment of truth now. Everything's in, all the wiring's plugged in, everything works. It powers on. When we push the power button, that's a good sign. Looks like everything's gonna clear the areas we were concerned with. And this is my pump wire right here, my pump power wire, that we are going to now fill and bleed the system. So I'm gonna clean up this table. And this should be the last time I have to take it apart or do anything with it. Okay, it's done. I promised you guys I would do this like a year ago. I finally did it. I found what I think is a very clean way of doing it with soft tubing. You know, I said in my last video, rigid tubing wouldn't have been possible in this, but I take that back. It totally would be. Not possible for me. I don't think I have the patience for that. Definitely hit some snags along the way though. The pump specifically being one of them, because what you really lack in this particular case is a significant amount of room to have a pump and a reservoir and all that stuff. And we even have 2 top hats on here. We could have added more top hats and gotten more thickness and added, you know, horizontal tubular reservoir and all that stuff. But then if you're adding all of this extra volume, you're kind of taking away from the whole purpose of this, you know, ultra small form factor. So I think the way it turned out and the compromises we made are pretty good. Now it's running a 9900K right now that's overclocked. It's sitting at 39C at idle, which is still kind of warm, but the fans are also barely turning right now. I have the fan profile set fairly aggressive to where it will kind of favor silence, unlike the motorcycle that just went by that you probably couldn't hear. Okay, now you probably heard it. So it'll favor silence in terms of the fans, but one thing we're dealing with right now is for some reason the Apogee Drive 2, even though we do have the PWM controller on it, plugged into the pump controller on the motherboard, no matter what I set it to, the pump still runs full speed, which is indicative of it's not seeing PWM. So I've tried it on DC just to see what happens. I've tried PWM, I've gone in there and manually adjusted it. So the pump is pretty noisy, but once the side is on, and if I ramp the fans up a little bit, it definitely kind of drowns out the noise of the pump, because the pump's that sort of a high pitch, irritating, here, you just listen. Yeah, it's just kind of it's that tone. It's not the volume, it's the tone that's just really annoying. So I still have to play with that, but like I said, this is more of a mobile editing rig for CES this year because we don't edit on laptops. We edit on overpowered machines, not to be confused with the terrible overpowered machines that Walmart's selling. This is definitely not one of those. One other thing I want to mention though is I know some people have probably commented about the barbs not having any zip ties or clamps on them. The barbs that I'm using are from Bits Power, and they are quad barbs. What I mean by that is there are 4 barbs on there. There's 4 rings that bite into the tube. When you put a hose clamp or you put a zip tie or anything on there, that's not for sealing it. If you need something like that to seal your tube, the tube and the barb are the wrong size. They don't match. What those are for is keeping it from popping off. But because we have 4 barbs per fitting on here, there is no chance of that happening. And anytime I had to remove a tube and put it back on, I usually trimmed it back a little bit so that it's nice and tight again, so that the tube is stretched out slightly, it wouldn't pop off. I do have some clamps I tried to put on there, which are little snap clamps, but they weren't the right diameter. So I'm just leaving it like this, and so far so good. Fingers crossed. But the pump though, like I said, the pump res combo, it was close. We showed you guys how it initially contacted the side panel, which by the way, we don't have the side panel on just for the sake of beauty shots, but with the side panel on, there's nice perforation that the light does escape. You can see the GPU block and stuff. It barely fits. And by barely, I mean the tubing still sort of pushes against the side there. So the config that I have right now is about the only way I could have gotten it to work. I had to use multiple fittings on the CPU side just so that it can make the turn back to this part of the case, which is where the tube is going through that mid plate and then actually going into the pump. But it all worked out. It filled pretty well, especially with that kind of a crazy IV contraption thing I sort of came up with to feed it. And there is absolutely no air in the system, because if I even slightly crack one of the fittings on the top of the radiator, it starts to leak fluid, which means that there is no air sitting up there, which is exactly what we wanted. So guys, I'm gonna go. Thanks for watching. Thanks for putting up with the terrible delays on this system, but now that we finally got our case and it's fully built in, I can say that you can comfortably, with two top hats, fit two 240mm radiators with a water-cooled graphics card and a water-cooled CPU. Could have easily done this probably with a single 240 and been plenty, but I wanted to take the challenge and accept it, and I think it turned out well. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one. Lambo in my garage to remind me of when I was living homeless in the Hollywood Hills. The smell of new electronics. Hit like if you're with me. I haven't had to talk to people in 5 days. When people talk to me at Thanksgiving, I just grunted and pointed the pie.